Many people refuse to share their stories of the paranormal, simply because they have no desire to tell others of something that they question themselves, and then be ridiculed for sharing it. Now, imagine being in a position of authority and having your mental stability questioned because of it. Thankfully, these officers were brave enough to share their stories. Enjoy. My uncle was the sheriff of a small town in New Mexico. He was the most hardcore person in our family, super straight-laced, never really BS'd, and wasn't at all a joker. So when he told this story, backed up by my aunt, we all believed it without question. A local reporter named Bob D. would always show up at any major police activity from the police scanner. Big car wrecks, fires, anything worth maybe reporting in the local paper. Everybody on the force knew Bob D. He was around at least once or twice a week at various police activities. Bob was a bit of a joker himself. He would mess with people by flicking behind their ears. People would react to the flicks thinking it was a bug, only to turn around and see it was Bob jerking around. Everybody liked Bob. Unfortunately, Bob had lung cancer and died suddenly. His wife buried him, against his wishes, as he wanted to be cremated. For the next couple of weeks after his funeral, people kept talking about seeing Bob at car wrecks, fires, and all the same stuff he used to report on. There were 20 to 30 reports like this from civilians and members of the force. My uncle didn't buy it. That is until the night he and my aunt showed up at our house, gun drawn, pale as paper. We asked him what the hell happened, and he had to sit down, take a breath, compose himself, and start to outline what had happened. Note, this is a guy that I never saw get rattled by anything. He said my aunt and he were sitting on the couch in their house watching TV. My uncle kept scratching at his ear over and over. Finally, my aunt asked him what the problem was, and he turned around just in time to see their bedroom door open, Bob D. standing in the doorway, clear as day. My uncle jumped up, cussed or something, got my aunt's attention, who turned to see him there too. As soon as they both made eye contact with him, Bob smiled, turned, walked across the living room and out their front door, closed the door behind himself, and was gone. My uncle got control of himself and ran outside, gun drawn, looking for Bob. But he was gone. At that point, they ran over to our place. He went over there and didn't see anything, but my aunt and uncle stayed at our place that night. At work the next day, all the guys in the force were giving my uncle lots of "we told you so." People around town said they saw Bob D. show up at police scenes for at least another 2 to 3 months. My dad saw him in our darkroom in our basement with a friend. He was flicking their ears in the dark. During the 3rd month people saw him, they kept saying he was looking worse and worse. My uncle saw him 2 more times, each time confirming he was looking more and more worn. My dad concluded that he was decomposing and that his ghost was reflecting the process. Now every time my ear itches, I get goosebumps. Called out to a residence in the boonies. This was in Wyoming, so the boonies really are the boonies. It was about 11 p.m. The call was about suspicious activity. When we got there, we are told by the family living there that there are very strange screams coming from a creek about 1,000 feet out. And sure enough, waiting outside on the porch with them for about a minute, I hear it. It is very hard to describe what it sounded like. Like a woman in very severe distress, but higher pitched, and each scream lasted for about 10 to 15 seconds. It never sounded like it was saying anything. It just sounded like the cry of sheer terror, and it repeated again. We tell the family we're going to investigate, so we walk down to the creek since it was nice out. We hear about 2 more screams, getting louder as we approach the creek. By now, we're both freaked out. There are 2 possibilities. Someone is getting murdered or maimed in the creek, or it's a wild animal. As we approach the creek bed, we hear no screams for about 5 minutes. We search around and find nothing, yelling at the top of our lungs for somebody to come towards us if they're there. Then, we hear the exact same scream behind us, exactly where we just came from. We get about halfway back to the house, and the scream comes so loudly it seems like it's right next to us. We frantically shine our flashlights everywhere and find nothing. No eye glints of animals, no rustling of bushes, just silence. We trace our steps back, and the scream comes from the creek again. This time, it lasted about 30 seconds and was much louder than before. Our retreat becomes a little more hastened. By this time, we're both scared shitless and verified with the family to call us again if they heard it. They never called again, and we got the hell out of there. I still don't know what that was, and as an avid outdoorsman, I know no animal makes a cry like that, especially one that can move stealthily without being spotted by flashlights. Something else about it that weirded me out was that it was completely silent while the screams were happening. During summer in Wyoming, there are always some type of ambient animal sounds. Frogs croaking, crickets, owls, coyotes, etc. But there was nothing. Until we were leaving and the screams had stopped, then a frog started croaking. It gives me the creeps just thinking about it still. Back when I was working as a cop on a military base, I loved working the night shift. Didn't deal with 99% of the bullshit the day shift dealt with, and what little stuff we did deal with was usually interesting. Well, most every building on a base is alarmed, and the alarms are tied right into a desk so we know the instant that they go off. When we get an alarm activation, we close the base, check the building, pull on all the doors to see if we can get in. If we can, we go into the building and secure it, check all the doors and corners to see if someone set the alarm off. Well, one night I was on patrol with my alpha partner, and we get called to respond to an alarm activation at the elementary school. So we go, secure the building, and call in that the building is secure. No problem, keep patrolling. 15 to 20 minutes go by, and we get another alarm activation. We get back out there and check, and now there is a maintenance door open that leads into a boiler room. Nothing in it. We close it, lock it, and get out. Another 20 minutes. Another alarm. We respond. All the doors are still locked, and we can't get in. Maintenance door is now locked. Call in the all clear. This time, my buddy and I sit on opposite sides of the school and watch to see if someone is coming and yanking on the doors to set the alarm off. We sit there and watch. Nothing happens. And right as we're about to leave, another alarm activation as we're sitting there. We inform the desk that we'd like the building manager on site to help us secure the interior and to let us in. It is now 3 a.m. The building custodian shows up, and we start doing a walkthrough, checking all the classrooms, checking all the maintenance rooms, and that's when we see one of the maintenance doors open with the lights on in the room. This room is literally the size of a closet. We walk down there and look in. No one's in it, and that door is locked when it closes. We look in there and find a single footprint of a bare foot made of water. Left foot, as I recall, and it's the size of a small child. Freaked the living hell out of us because no one reported a missing child, and the entire building was clear and still locked up. No one left, no one entered, and we checked every inch of that damn building. Literally a 3-hour deep sweep, including ceiling tiles. Freaked the ever-living shit out of us, and to this day, my partner refuses to go into that school. Schools are already pretty fucking spooky when they're empty. I don't believe in ghosts or the supernatural in any way, shape, or form. That said, I have had some very strange experiences working at a hospital. I have tons of stories, but I'll share the strangest one. The hospital was made up of several buildings, mostly mid-20th century. There was a large 7-story building with offices and accommodation for student nurses, a large central admin building with 8 wings for patients, and a forensic criminally insane unit. A new building under construction to replace the old, a building with a gym, kitchen, dining room, swimming pool, 2 small outlying buildings for children and adolescents, and then the old insane asylum, built in 1856, 20-foot ceilings, 200-pound oak and steel doors, 18 to 24-inch thick walls, underground tunnels. Everything you've ever thought an old Victorian insane asylum would be. When I first started working there in 1992, my job was to go from the guard post in the Hugh Bell building down into the basement, unlock the steel doors leading into the tunnel system, lock myself into the tunnel system, walk along the DeWolf building, go through another set of steel gates, locking myself inside, walk the tunnel system to the end, and then go up in an elevator I called down using a special key. Then I'd go up to the 4th floor and walk through each floor, checking doors until I got to the main floor, where I'd walk out of the main entrance and back to the Hugh Bell building outside. I had to do this roughly every hour. In 1995, the building closed, and patients were moved into the new Mount Hope building. Because the space was no longer being used, and because the building was slated to be demolished in 1996, they didn't bother heating it. It had no power, and maintenance had been through and stripped it of things like light bulbs, etc. A lot of the old furniture was left in place, as they had bought new stuff for the new building. One of the things that also happened was they shut off the power to the elevators and had all the phones removed. Now I know that every phone was removed because I was the guy who went through with the guy from the phone company in late summer and removed every single phone from the place. Now it's the winter of '95, and I'm working a back shift, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. I was a shift supervisor and had 3 guards on the ground with me and 1 locked in the forensic unit. Around 2 a.m., we get a call from the hospital operator saying that the police had called to let her know that they were getting calls from inside the DeWolf building. She had, of course, told them that that was impossible and why. They insisted that they were getting calls from inside the DeWolf building. So the 4 of us go into the building and each take a floor of the building and search it. It was the dead of winter, and temperatures had been getting fairly low. There had been a pipe burst about a week before, which maintenance had dealt with, but it had left 2 floors entirely coated with ice. There was ice on everything. The ice was about 3 inches thick, and shadows were bouncing everywhere from the flashlights hitting ice. So we're walking through the building, checking every unit, every floor, eyeballing every empty phone jack. Nothing. We get back to the guard post, and report that the building is empty. 10 minutes later, the operator calls back and says that there are more calls coming from the DeWolf and that the police are insisting we find the cause. So we go back over. I was about 10 feet away from the nursing station on a unit called N16, and the operator calls to say that there is an active call right now coming from the N16 nursing station. I go rushing over to see. There's nothing there. No person. No phone. I tell the operator where I am and that there's nothing in there. She says that now it's coming from the N16 lounge, which is way at the other end of the unit. So I go rushing down there, and again, nothing. Now, it's coming from the N16 elevator phone, and this time it's not just dead air, but it sounds like someone talking with their hand over the phone. So I go rushing back down to the other end of the unit. This is a good 60 seconds of so we're running. It's a big building. I'm standing outside the closed, unpowered elevator doors, and she's saying the calls are coming in every few seconds from the elevator I'm standing in front of. Then they stop. We all decide to wait inside the building, one person per floor, for a few minutes until we know things have stopped. We wait 15 minutes, and as we start to leave, the phone calls start again. One more trip around the building, same results. Eventually, we say we couldn't waste any more time on it, and it must be a technical glitch. The operator puts in a call to the phone company and requests an engineer first thing next morning. I was supposed to go home at 7 a.m., my last back shift, so I was starting 4 days off. But I stayed to meet the engineer because I was curious. The engineer said that the lines had likely been reassigned and that the calls were probably coming from real people wherever the lines had been put. So we go into the old building and check the junction box, and the engineer gets a puzzled look on his face. He hooks up some equipment and is talking back to someone at the phone company. He starts checking connections and numbers. Then we start walking around the building and plugging his phone into jacks. Turns out that none of the lines had been reassigned, and that they were all live. Here's the strange part. That day, the engineer and the phone company killed all the lines. And the phone calls continued off and on again for 2 more weeks, then stopped, and we never did find out the cause. We got a call of trespassers at an abandoned hospital during the daytime. There was on-site security who kept it secure, even though it was shut down. They swore they heard footsteps and talking on the second floor over the past few days. They locked down the entire perimeter and called us out there. There was no way out. We went in there with 6 officers, started from the 7th floor, and systematically checked every single room down to the bottom floor. There was no power, so we were lucky it was still daylight and there were a lot of windows. It was an older hospital, so they left old CRT monitors from the 1980s and 90s in there. It was pretty eerie and reminded me a lot of the first scenes from The Walking Dead. We cleared down from the floors 7 to 5, no problem. And once we hit the 4th floor, things started getting weird. This was the hospital storage area. Instead of the big spacious rooms, it was super cramped and cinder block walls. There were chain link cages all over the place with old locks on it. It seriously looked like a horror movie prisoner area where they locked up victims. It was also pitch black. The hospital was so big that we worked in 2-man groups on each floor, but naturally split up as the floors opened up more. The 3rd floor was a mental ward area, so the padded walls and pitch dark rooms started to get me a little nervous. The 2nd floor was by far the worst, the surgery ward. There were no windows, and again it was pitch black, and there were large, eerie operating rooms all over. In the middle of some of the rooms were large metal slabs where they would operate on people. In adjoining rooms, they had huge red pegboards where they stored the surgery power tools. How did I know it was power tools? They had marked the outlines of various drills, saws, and other painful-looking devices. It was kind of freaky thinking about how many people had died in those rooms when they couldn't save them. I was definitely nervous clearing those rooms solo in pitch black with only a flashlight. We eventually cleared every single room on every single floor and found nothing. The security guards swore up and down they always heard talking and footsteps down the halls. We pretty much swore off that place and told them not to call us ever again. I recently started working as a security guard, and one of my first assignments was the graveyard shift at a new housing development outside of town. Over the course of the 3 nights I worked there, I had very bizarre things happen. While doing my patrols through the neighborhood, I would often see people watching me from the upper windows of the vacant houses. But when I would enter the houses to investigate, they would be empty. One of the first things on my to-do list when I arrived on site was to go through the 8 model homes next to the real estate office and turn off all the lights and TVs. The first night, this part went smoothly. But the following night, as I was making my way through the kitchen of the 4th house, I heard the light switch click and all the lights in the kitchen went out. It wasn't a power surge or a blown breaker, as all the appliances were still on, and all the little green lights underneath the light switches were still lit. A few minutes later, I heard another click, and the lights came back on, followed by the lights in the next house going out, but the TV remaining on. By the time I made my way to the next house, the lights were back on, but the TV was in standby, which was only possible by hitting the button on the front. As I was finishing up in the last house, I looked out the window and saw that the 2nd and 3rd houses were lit up again. The 3rd night, the light situation got weirder. The lights would either turn off or on in a room as I entered, and in one house, as I entered the kitchen, the hood light over the stove turned on. As I turned to look at it, I heard a series of clicks coming from the 2nd floor, as if someone were running through the house, turning on the lights. When I went up there, sure enough, many of the lights I had turned off were back on. In another house, a desk lamp turned itself back on 3 times. Another lamp in the same house had a dimmer that slowly started lighting up right in front of me. Now, for the worst event. As I was walking past one of the construction sites, I saw what appeared to be a skunk walk behind a porta potty. When it walked back out, however, it looked more like a black Shih Tzu. It then proceeded to change size, shape, color, and it did this several more times in front of me. A Doberman, then a bloodhound, then a tan mastiff, and finally a yellow lab, before running off into the dark. I'm willing to concede all of these can either be chalked up to my mind or eyes playing tricks on me, or timer gone haywire, although I was assured there wasn't one. But the last one defies logical explanation. As I was walking back to the office around 2:30 a.m., I glanced up at one of the houses, and as I did, something hit me between my left pec and shoulder. Hard enough to stagger me. I weigh 250 pounds, so I'm not exactly little. It felt as if someone were walking the opposite direction on the sidewalk and shoved their way past me. I have since asked my supervisors not to assign me to that site again. Well, what about you? If someone gave you authority and a gun, would you openly admit to seeing things that just weren't there? Or that some unseen force had been playing mind games with you? Either way, the confusion and terror these officers felt while in that moment are something they stand by, and will most likely make believers out of any skeptics. See you next time.